Caarnji was the winner this time. Um, so let's import his hand history. I think this was 9-man game. Okay, so here are all the hands from that one. Okay, I will take the Omputtelija hand history to next one. So in here is my heart if there's enough sample on some villain. So ace queen, we should definitely be opening. Sizing can be 50, 60. My preference would be 60 from the early position. And for callers, in general, I would just check fold here. No need to try to represent big pocket versus 3 players. The problem is that if they have any pocket pair, I don't think random player is going to be folding. Could also check. Yeah, it was half dollar game. So well, against bet of 60, we can look the turn as well, but folding is not big mistake. Big mistake either. Both has had 6, which is quite achievement. And from those hands we can obviously see that they are calling with a lot of stuff. H5 shooter should be easy complete here, because we can try to hit the not flush draw, and hitting ace can be good as well. But nothing on the flop, so just check it. In the river, I don't think there's a lot of value in betting this ourselves. There can be some of better hands, so I would check and evaluate if the bet comes. I would probably call some small bet still, but if they pot size or something, then folding is likely best. Some of really obvious open folding hands, and could open any pocket pair with these stack depths is pretty standard. A6 suited you can open, but it's probable that they call so much on these games that it's likely better to be just open folding. Well, we could check that what they played. Yeah, well, this is pretty common to see limp calling even against some plays with the small pocket pairs from unknown or random players. Of course, his sub with ace king suited is kind of well, it's not overplaying, but it would be better to raise smaller in general. Okay, deuce is still okay to open. For example, in this spot, if we were, let's say that the big blind was 100, and at that point it would be questionable to min raise as open, because there's not really deep enough stacks to kind of set mine or play for set mining kind of with the open raise. It might be better to be open shoving instead, or open folding. Okay, deuces, we can check behind here, we can see bet. Both are good, okay ups. And good side of c-betting is that we can get a lot of equity from the villain to fold, because he always, if we are ahead, he always has 2 overcards pretty much. But if you are checking, then it's probably okay to call at least once if villain bets, if his sizing is not huge. Both villains call, try a high flop, no reason to c-bet here, just check and hope it goes checked pretty much. And still, I would be checking the turn against 2 players in general. There is some merit in betting because turn does open few draws on the table, but it's just that our hand is often questionable whatever we can bet river for value again. And even on this situation it's a bit tricky because it's kind of unlikely villain would have the ace. Of course sometimes he has it. But now if the villain has something like 7 or 6, it can be tough to get value by betting, but at the same time, from his VPI PPFR, he seems to be pretty passive overall, so I would probably try to bet like 400 here as default. Check calling is also an option. I don't think we should be necessarily check raising here anymore, because as said, more often he has some sort of draw on the turn. Sometimes he might have the ace, which probably calls our shove, but he can also have the flush. So I would usually just check call if checking. And he had surprisingly strong hand this time. And some of comments here on the chat. And yeah, I pretty much agree with the argument that with ace-6 suited, in higher stakes it would make more sense to be open raising, but probably not in these games. And we can see a lot of passive lines like ace-10 limp calling here. But it's quite common still that these players are, even if they are limping the premium stuff, they also limp enough of the weaker range that it's often quite profitable to attack those limps quite actively. Well, here with the queen jack we can basically, well, we have 40 hands, or this time he has not been playing any of those, so if I have a read that he has not played a single hand, then pretty much then min raising any 2 is the standard here. And I think using bit higher sizing doesn't give that much benefit with these stack depths. So I would be just min raising. Day 7 again, I would just min raise, and yeah, we pretty much have to fold. Of course, pots are great, but A7 will play really badly post flop. So if we call here, we just end up folding huge amount, and even if we do hit ace, it's not that often necessarily good because he might have bigger aces. So pretty much every time folding. Basically, only option to outside of folding would be to shove if we have a read that villain is 3-bet bluffing huge amount, but that's probably not good idea in these games in general. And pocket nines, we can of course shove profitably, but I think in general this hand would give more profit by min raising, even if there can be some some problematic situations coming, especially if we have aggressive looking player. This would work quite well as inducing hand. But if players are just calling huge amount, then open shoving can be, or it's not like bad mistake at least. Or it's not like mistake at any point, but it's just a question that if it's the optimal line to play. And queen then called here is pretty horrible. Well, king 6, this guy just lost a big pot. This hand tends to be bit weak to be shoving, especially as there is no antes. So if it was suited, I would probably just shove, or maybe min raise call against PP and min raise fold against small blind. But I think crappy offsuit king, we can just open fold here. But we can also check this situation. King 6 off. I think it's this one. I would think that international ranges it's not going to beat here. Of course, small blind is tight, so he might be fold. I probably folds too much. So international ranges, it would be king 9 on the bottom. King 6 will be minus, but well, I don't think we can necessarily tighten small blind range. At least it's still pretty tight. And the PP is questionable. I think he has been pretty active. He has lost a big pot where he praise called queen 10 really loosely. So I think we cannot really tighten his range at either. He's probably more easily wider than tighter than this, I would assume. So I think shoving king 6 off will be minus EV here. Suited would be fine. Is for suited again, kind of. If we min raise here, it's pretty close whatever we should be calling. We probably should be folding against, well, maybe calling button, but PP is also really active looking, so I would probably just open fold here. Yeah, I think also as Caarnji said in the chat that PP is most likely calling too wide for that. If there was antis, it would be closer. 9-7 off would be defendable hand against really loose looking player. It's not necessarily bad to just fold, but it's still a playable hand. But I think in general, when we are talking about player who has probably not that much experience post flop and so on, it's totally fine to give up those sort of situations, even if it's not like optimal line. And in here I would probably min raise if I have really typed read on the middle lane, because we just make auto profit. And ace king suited pretty much shoving here. I think something against this active looking player, I think I would be shoving at least ace 10 and pretty much every pocket pair, and some of the good Broadway hands like king queen and so on. And basically if we have some sort of flatting range here, we pretty much have to call against the PP at least if the open raiser, or if the PP shoves and the open raiser folds. Yeah, hero has min raised small. This is not mistake in a way, but it just easily end up into situations where, for example, I would assume that most players will be calling quite a lot here, so of course it's good for us, we have great hand in position, but it's just that there will be bit over pot size bet behind if he calls, so it can get into pretty awkward situations if we don't hit. So I would like more of this line with some big pocket pair and maybe just shoving this and preventing those nasty possibilities. But again, the optimal line might be to try and induce action by smaller 3-bet, even if it brings some nasty spots sometimes. So now we are in the heads up, and in heads up in this situation we want to be in general a bit more tight in these spots when we would be defending against chip leader. This would be a pretty reasonable spot to be shoving with 4-6 suited, because small blind has been really tight, and when he folds, PP should be careful, and from his statistics he would seem to be a reasonable player. So in this spot I would be shoving. We can actually check it as well. And in these games it's probably not the greatest idea to go too wide with the bubble abuse, ICM pressure aspects of these games, but still in this hand, when the small blind has been really tight and PP seems to be a reasonable player, we could be shoving, because I think small blind might be as tight as here, maybe even tighter. Of course these are again quite tight calling ranges, so they might not be tighter than this, but yeah, it's still quite marginal. Again, if there was antis it would help a bit. I think this was a bit different. Hopefully this was 9-man normal SNG, that I'm not talking of some weird other game. And yeah, he has been so tight that shoving any two should be totally fine. At this point it starts to be questionable whatever we want to really min raise fold, even if we have total crap. But I think min raising is still better than open folding against this guy. And ace queen I would be shoving even though we are on the bubble. Yeah, the 6-4 suited might be also min raise. Min raise. Not totally sure. I think small blind was so short that we should be still calling. Well, here we have bit more marginal situation than with the ace queen, but I would probably still be shoving here. The danger is of course that this guy can make two wide raise calls. Well, calling is kind of tricky because we can't really play this hand as a set mining play. Of course we have position, and in this situation when he does fold and we face these smaller stacks we should be calling every time. But of course it does look pretty strong when the PP shows, but we just get such a great pot odds. Yeah. And he's still folding. Well, yeah, next hand he has to be playing. Queen Jack. Well, this player range is wide, but I don't really see point in shoving here overall. There's just not that much to be gained by that. Calling is, I suppose, okay. And in here I would definitely check, and I don't. Basically, button shouldn't be bluffing that much here. Of course, there is some side pot, but I would probably just check call here and try to lure him into betting again, but check shoving is not mistake either. And I think it's still quite unlikely he would be calling in this spot if we shove the river. Take then off, we could be opening, though the PP is quite aggro, so he might attack that too often. And here I would definitely be defending by flatting against min raise, and even shoving would be better than folding. A7 off, it's going to be okay to shove. And in general I would probably not be min raise folding against this aggressive player. Well, for the suited defending is pretty loose. Pretty loose. The main problem is that even though it's suited and connected, it's just so small. Small combination that we pretty rarely hit that much. But definitely calling here because this is one of the better flops for us. And in here you can bet, but you can also check behind because it's pretty scary board. So if we bet here, we might just get huge amount of folds unless he happens to have the 7 or something like that. So I wouldn't necessarily hate to just check behind and give him one more chance to bluff. And kind of same situation in the turn or river, that considering the board we should have pretty tough time to get value from the weaker hand, but if value betting here, I would size it pretty small, like 600 or something. Yeah, the a7 off is, we can actually check it. You can actually check it. It's going to be pretty marginal at least. I'm not sure if we necessarily give that much info on the villains. So with this assumption it would be pretty much break even. Pretty much break even, but we can also check that if we do min raise, on what assumption we could be min raise calling, if that's reasonable at any point. So he needs to be pretty wide, even if he shoves 30%. A7 off is not going to be calling hand, and quite big minus still. So yeah, against aggressive PP, it's on the borderline whatever is the best line overall. Open folding feels still bit tight overall. Well, we are now on the even stacks. I would be pretty happy min raise folding ace-3 off, and he does so. But that sort of hand is kind of okay to be raise folding, because you at least have the blocker value here. And king 8 off definitely defending against this guy. And he checks, so I will just bet here something around 400, 350. Yeah, folding h7 is totally standard when we have this aggro guy. King queen, I would be happily shoving pretty much, even though we are in the middle. We are the middle stack here. Flatting again. Main problem is that we end up check folding quite easily on the flop. Of course, again, if the BP does shove, we have to call, at least if the button folds. But I think this would be really often profitable shoving hand against this active button raiser. Now we do hit, and I would lead here something like 900 or so. And now again, it's quite unlikely that at least the button would have 10x, so I would be leading again on the river. Big blind is more likely having 10x here, but of course we can't be folding. He could be value betting something worse, like 7x for example, or bluffing, so, or value betting weaker king. But I would like more to just shove pre-flopped here. And pocket deuces, pretty much versus anyone, we should be just shoving with, let's say, 20 pp or less, especially against active player. It's just going to be profitable. Well, 7-5 we could be just folding. It's close. It's really loose defend, I would say, but it can be reasonable. It has some playability. Turn really depends on the player, because some people never pretty much fold if they check this sort of board, but we have seen this guy check folding quite decent amount, so I might be trying to stop here. And now we should be value betting. He might be calling with some type of ace or king high. And we are close to never behind, I would say. Well, this guy has been quite 3-bet happy. In general, I would not be raise calling 20 pp deep in heads up with this weak ace. More standard would be something like ace 8, ace 9 off. But against this guy I wouldn't necessarily hate to raise call here. Pocket threes I would be just open shoving, because the problem is that if he calls we are rarely happy on the post flop and we don't really want to be inducing. Of course, if we min raise and he shoves, we should be calling, but open shoving is the best play. Three 8 suited, I might try how he reacts to limping. And ace queen, pretty standard 3-bet spot. King 10 I would usually be calling. Shoving will not be bad either, but I just think that this hand gets more value by flatting here, taking it to post flop. I have to say that I don't understand really this donk bet at all, because there's pretty good chance that if he has air he's just folding. We might induce some sort of bluff raise by this lead sometimes, because in my eyes on the opponent's shoes it might look pretty weird, but we 10 shouldn't really be folding to raise, in my opinion. This should be pretty standard check calling hand to showdown pretty much against aggro player. Give him space to bluff or value bet wars. Again, 7-10 might be something to limp against 3-bet happy guy. Well, this one we can pretty happily raise call. And I would see bet here on the really dry flop something like 600 or so. But 800 is okay in itself, but no need to go any higher. King 6 again, kind of hand that do we want to be raise folding against him. Well, in this flop we can see bet and we get pot down quite often, but I don't see that he would fold any better hand probably. Maybe some better king high, but those are not big part of his range, so this is also a decent spot to just check behind because of our showdown value. And well, we have the best hand, but well, I think it's best to just bet here and try to get value from some draws or so. But we will get huge amount of folds by betting here. And now even if the tree gives straight, we should be value betting. And sizing can be small or should be small. So I think even 400 is totally fine. Well, King Jack is strong enough that we can be min-raise calling, but min-raise folding would be totally absurd. And we should definitely call his min-raise. And he sizes it pretty big here. In general, I would like to call here, but his sizing makes it bit ugly. Yeah, the King 10 hand was pretty horrible overall, I would say. And in here, I think, well, basically this sort of flop shouldn't be something that Villain is c-betting that much, but I don't think we should expect him to be that good of player, so I think we should be just check shoving here. And he does raise call. The main problem is that if we want or can't expect much of fold equity here, then the weak flush draw is not going to be really good enough to stack off, because we don't have any sort of, the 9 is unlikely to be out here, so it would be better to have at least 9-6 so that we would have at least cut shot as well. This can be folded on the flop, but I think shoving is not mistake either. So I think we had some new hand histories there. And good evening to checked me. So at least Eki had one history. And I think there was someone else as well. If I'm not totally wrong on that. Yeah, the Omputtelija had the one, yeah. And if I happen to miss someone's hand history or so on, please say on the chat. So now we can remove Caarnji and, well, go back should be. Try again. So Caarnji removed, and we have Eki and Omputtelija. Hopefully it's not Omaha history. And yeah, we have something interesting coming in a few weeks, which Arnimetsa posted a link about. So let's go for next round. And Omputtelija won. Want this one. So what was the nick here? Pena 82. And as said earlier, if you don't want to use your own nickname to be shown here on the public stream, you can also change your nick to something else. For example, your forum nick or some hero or something else like that. Forum nick is probably best sort of stuff, so that because if multiple people uses the hero tier, it can get into pretty messed up. Well, I seem to have multiple histories here now. Can you say that which? Well, I can check the date. 1611. So it's this one. So this was the 18. Oh no, this is some MTT it seems. Yeah, it was from the 8 poker, I think. Well, first hand we have to be folding. If we were, for example, on the button, on the big blind, it would be quite close, I think, because of the hand equity. King 7 is going to be too weak. And in general, pretty happily taking free flop here. Against some players, I might make small raise to 3000 if I think they are limp folding huge amount. And yeah, pretty much have to fold, just having one overcard and cut shot. I think it's not really worth enough to try to get tricky, because if we call here, it has to be on idea to float, and it can get pretty expensive on our short stack. King 3 suited, I would be open shoving on the unopened pot, but have to be folding against raise. 9 jack suited, we should be shoving happily. No idea what sort of price structure there is in this game. Okay, it's 180 men. Is there 180 men in? Because I thought that this was. Oh no, yeah, it was the one poker stars. Well, so we are in the monies, and on the 180 men's, it's not the ICM is not that important outside of final table, because it's still pretty top heavy price structure, and this is really loose with 5-9 suited. We could try to see if it, because the villain min raising range has to be really exploitable to make this one good play. And I think outside of final table we could be using like 80-20 structure. And it was, what was the name? Big Bad Blonde. Probably using min raise. Well, quite close to it anyway. So here, with the assumption that he opens 43% and calls 29%, we should not be shoving this hand. Of course, I would say that it's still pretty rare that anyone would call that this wide. So I think more often seen calling range might be something like this maybe. Well, now it will tighten a lot of this opening range to balance this tighter calling range. So yeah, maybe it's possible if he opens wide enough, and the opening range is kind of maybe unrealistic now, but now it would be any two. But anyway, we need some sort of, well, yeah, how many 10 hands so far on this button steals that 40%. Of course, small blind looks pretty tight, but I think in general I will not go this wide. Okay, well, we can't really say anything about his ace king call. Six seven suited, we do get pretty nice odds here. Of course, trouble is that we have one player behind. I might just fold here, because it's not hugely profitable to ISO shove here either way. But we can check it as well. Basic hand. Did I have some FGS here, because it takes quite long. So it was this one shoving. So it's break even pretty much if villain is shoving 60%, and of course I would say again that PP is unlikely to call quite this wide. Quite that wide. I think again something like this would be closer. It's still, I think, around 10 pp, and there are antis, so I don't think we should be tightening much from this 60%. And if we block that one, so it's going to be, with this assumption, 0.03%, so it's really marginal. Or I looked wrong one, and here 7-6 suited, so 0.2. It would become a bit more clear decision. Yeah, it's reasonable, but I don't think this is mandatory spot to take. For 3 suited, in general we should not be opening, but if we have tight enough reads on the players, we can try to min raise. .97 shooter is going to be too weak to open turn. This is kind of interesting one actually. 5-3 off is of course total crap, but when there are the antis and there is only a bit over 3 PP, it's quite close. Quite close. Should we be calling any two? I think folding absolute bottom is still going to be okay. So yeah, it's 95% of calling range if villain is shoving 42%, which is probably quite often going to happen. So I might be taking this spot. Right now we are in the final table, I would assume. And in here again we should be calling, especially now it's even shorter player, so we should be calling any two against him, but once there's ISO Razor we of course fold. 3 crappy hands. Ace-9 off from UTG in this spot is not that great hand, and I think something like Ace-10, Ace-9 suited we could be shoving, but I think Ace-9 is kind of tricky. We could min raise and call against this Loga and BB guys because of their shorter stacks, but we have to fold against anyone else, and open shoving here is not going to be profitable. So folding is totally okay. And in here we should be calling, definitely calling. Quite tricky looking player, and he's shoving shallow stacks, so 7-6 suited would be quite decent hand to be shoving here. Min raise fold can be kind of exploitable line as well, but I think shoving here is quite good for a few reasons. There is one much smaller stack, so we get good amount of folds in general against the BB, and even though the small blind does cover you, it would still be a huge amount of his stack if he calls. So if assuming that they are not calling way too wide, this would be really standard open shove situation, in my opinion. Of course, in 180 mens it's always quite kind of questionable how much ICM pressure people feel, so to say. But 7-6 suited is still hand that has quite good equity even if called, so it would be quite marginal if villains called this wide. Well, closer than I actually assumed, but still I wouldn't hate shoving here. Small blind range seems pretty tight, but at the same time he's risking a lot here by calling. if they are tight enough looking, then min raising might be option as well. And definitely calling here, any two pretty much. Any king X should be shoved in that spot pretty much. Queen Jack, I would be happy to open shove. Queen Jack off is going to be in general too weak hand to be shoving here against the open raise. If it was suited, it would be a bit more reasonable if assuming that he's min raising wide. And pocket nines, I think open shoving will be the optimal play pretty much. And he wakes up with AC, so that's just to set up. So let's go for the next one. I think it was pretty well played by Hero here. So we will probably take at least two more histories. And Neo won this time. Well, the Queen Jack suited, or yeah, well, I don't really like to have flatting range in that situation. If it was, we had actually Queen Jack off, but if this was the situation Caarnji meant, I don't really like to have flatting range here because we are investing so much, and if they shove behind, it gets pretty awkward with any mediocre hand. And as said, we invest so much, and we pretty much have to be folding against G-bets a lot of time. So basically, if I see reg player flatting in this sort of situation, I would read it really often as a trap with some big pocket pair, if he's good reg, that is. Because I don't think we can create sensible flatting range in this situation. That would not be trap heavy. Yeah, the 9-5 suited, we just get such great pot odds here. Or, well, it might have been different hand actually, but so who was the winner? It was Neo, okay. So this was 9 men, I think, 107, and this was probably normal speed then. This is bugging or something. Why doesn't it give that select player? Well, weird. Let's try to close and restart. Oh yeah, that 3-bet shove. Yeah, it can be. I think it can be okay against wide enough player, but of course, in that sort of situation, actually, that he's min raising with shallow stacks, I would also often read on the small blind if I think the button is a really loose player, because if the small blind is active as well, it should tighten button open raising range. But if small blind seems really nitty, then it might be reason for button to widen his range. So that sort of stuff will matter also. And yeah, from Neo I have quite a few histories here. 16th of this month, so it's this one. We can probably go to first hands quite quickly and not forget age. We should be set mining. It's not necessarily completely set mining situation, but and against 6 bet of 60 I would just check raise here, because I don't really want to let turn card this cheaply, even though it's quite dry, but there can be some straight draws and so on. But yeah, seems to work pretty nicely. But I think any king X will be calling check raise anyway, and definitely that strong king. King 10 suited against min raise, we can be calling here and pretty much check folding. Turn is kind of tricky because I think semi-bluffing won't work against two people that often here, so I would probably just check again and check call here, because we do have open ender. If the queen comes, we have the nut straight, and if the 7 comes, we are also with pretty nutty hand, and even the king might be out sometimes. Of course, there is flush draw, so those might not be out for us, but and check folding, pretty much check folding still. Queen jack suited, we have weak position, but small raise and very playable hand, so flatting here would be okay. See, betting is okay, though it's quite coordinated, but I think still that we can get enough of some crappier hands from him to fold, because it's still a high flopped. And pretty easy folding hands. 7-4 suited. I would probably complete here. Something like 7-4 off, we would be better just folding, but suited gives it more value. And yeah, king 9 suited, I think it's fine to fold here. King 10 suited, I would probably be flatting. We have position and pretty cheap price, so I don't think flatting king 9 suited would be mistake either, but it's fine to fold. And here I would see bet something like 160 or so. It's still pretty dry flop, so no need to go bigger than that. 9 off. In general, if I have this sort of statistic on wheel lane, I would probably just open fold here. Of course, sample is not much, but it's really crappy hand. And checking here. And I will be check folding because even though we have some backdoors, but the pot is going to be so big so quickly that we have tough time to continue even if the turn is good one, if it's not like 9 or jack. For example, like this one, it would be really ugly overall. We would have huge draw but facing shove, so well, 6 jack is more reasonable. We could also try to limp here if we think that villain is not folding against min raise that much. And turn gives us gut shot. It's kind of a scare card to any sort of 9 or 8. Well, most of those combinations. Of course, if he did have some sort of straight draw on the upper end, then queen helps him, but this might be spot to see barrel again. If I barrel here, I would size it around 360 at least. And I think just check folding the river is going to be best. We can sometimes be ahead with the 6, but it's not much of showdown value to us. Yeah. Well, he did have the gut shot here, but this is kind of a problem with barreling that these players might have a hard time to fold anything. And 6-4 again, pretty loose looking players, so we should be just open folding here. And I think if we have read that villain is defending possibly really wide, this is okay spot to bet. But I wouldn't try to multiple barrel this sort of player. I think if we have, in general, if we have read that villain has something like 40 VPP, we should be just snap folding the button situation. And queen, I would be just checking, we sometimes have the best hand. And the problem here is that I would actually be quite surprised if he does fold. Yeah, he called for split pot. So now we are in the bubble. Pretty easy defend, deep stacks. In here, in general, I would be just checking back because it should be quite tough for us to get anything better to fold, at least with one barrel. So if I do bluff here, I would fire at least 2 barrels. Especially against Rex, I would be pretty hesitant to bet once and then give up. Of course, there are some turn cards that will improve our equity with Queen Jack here. And just check folding. Well, this is again really exploitable style. And if I don't have tight reach, then I should be open folding, or hero should be open folding. And from what we have saw so far he has been defending all the time, so no crime to just give some respect to villain and just fold the crap. And probably it would make more sense to try more of limping when he seems to be quite happy to defend, at least from this sample. Of course, you might have bigger sample and more reads on the guy. Well, this guy calls with 3-8, so probably not the greatest idea to go for two wide shoving against him. Pocket 5, we could just open shove here. Of course, it's kind of deep stacked, but when we assume that the player is probably defending quite a lot, then I think it's still the optimal play. And a7 I would min raise and fold against both players in general. And shoving, well, of course we get good ICM pressure on the small blind if he understands the situation, but I would probably still prefer to min raise fold. PP is really passive and the small blind doesn't seem that aggro either. Something like a7 suited would be more reasonable shoving hand. So it's around half point, I think, this one. Five also shove versus button opening. Well, we did saw that he did make really loose call against this small blind shove earlier, but it can be okay if he's been active open raiser. So a7, if we assume that the small blind is folding huge amount of hands overall, it should be okay, but I think in general this might be a bit too tight range for him. At least if he's not a good reg. So it's on the borderline, and I would prefer myself to use this hand as a min-raise folding hand. Perhaps shove the a7 suited if I think that the small blind will be attacking min-raise. Well, ace-10 off I would be opening here. Opening here, it's still pretty playable hand. King 5 I would just give up, because his range can be quite wide, but calling tends to be kind of problematic. Maybe if he had min raised we might be calling, but and I don't like to 3-bet bluff against him. And we open again, he defends. Well, this is a reasonable spot to c-bet. And decent one to continue betting. Of course, kind of problem even here is that if we hit only flush on the river, for example, it's pretty tricky situation. And it does look that he has something here when he calls again. So, and he's smallest stack, so I would give up here. Yeah, king 7. So pretty loose again. He would probably have folded that one against third barrel, but It's also the weakest part of his range, or should be. But I would be just folding these crappy hands because he seems to be defending every time. Okay, deuces, just open shove. And I wouldn't try to re-steal here. He's probably calling too much, and I'm pretty okay raising here. Of course it depends. From this statistic it would seem that they are really active, but the samples might still be pretty low on the 3 bets and so on, so and not much to say it here, and pretty horrible play from his part. His preflop defend is fine, but when he has 5 high flush draw he shouldn't be semi-bluffing with that. Well, this is sort of situation where I might shove myself sometimes against some regulars, but it depends mostly on history. I think flatting is probably the worst play because the ace-6 suited, even though it's suited, it's not going to play that great. So I think folding or shoving are the reasonable options if we think he's 3-betting small with wide range. And fine defend, and I think there's not much reason to be raising here, just flat his c-bet. Yeah, I like the limps. 9-7 plays decently and he has not been folding against min raises. And this time he folds when we actually have something. 9-8, I would be flatting here. I don't think there's really reason. Shoving would probably be profitable as well, but if he has better, I don't think he's folding any of those, so just flat and use the position and playable hand. Yeah, we can open here, we could be limping. It's just that he basically has even a bit better situation to defend against you because you are now the middle stack here. So we get into pretty awkward situation here. And again, if I think he's out of line really often, I would prefer to shove compared to call in this situation, because we just end up check folding huge amount. Well, now we hit, and no reason to be raising or folding, just check call. And turn is kind of ugly, but if I do defend pre-flop, I would still go with my hand. He can have, basically he shouldn't be value betting any weaker made hand, but he can have some semi bluffs. Jack does open those quite a bit, so I think if we do defend pre-flop by calling and give up here, we are just going to burn money, in my opinion. And king 10 suited, pretty standard shove in my opinion. At least we should be calling and never folding. H7 suited, easy open, and he solves, so and king 4 suited is fine to defend, and definitely check calling here. Against good racks this can be kind of tricky situation, because when you flat pre-flop you don't really have much of strong combination on this board, so it might be something he tries to bluff multiple streets, but I think you should be calling here without some specific read. Of course he can have some maybe king queen weak AX type of hand. He's value betting this way. And queen 3, I think you should be shoving. You should be shoving, in my opinion. Well, it can be quite close actually. Against regular. Yeah, it's a bit outside of Nash range, but it also assumes that villain is calling 40% of hands, so I think quite many will be tighter than this. More like something like, maybe something like this would be closer to what I would expect. And then we can shove any two already. But I think still that this is closer than the over 40%, because you are still shoving closer to 10 pp's. But depends on the rec. And queen jack we should definitely defend here, and shoving is totally fine. Five seven suited might be something to try and limp again. He seems to be really active on playing against you on those situations, so. And because of that, queen 9 off would probably be best to just open shove here. I personally like this play, because open folding will be bit too tight, and other options are not that great. And for example, in this situation, I think villain shouldn't be shoving, but just flatting. He has great price, great hand position. So into heads up, we can defend here, it's okay. And usually when he checks, his range is going to be capped, but it's just going to be quite costly too, because again this is kind of situation where I don't necessarily like to bet just once if I decide to semi bluff. Defending 5 jack off, in my opinion, is not going to be good. It has really bad playability, and he's not even using min raise. So just give up if you don't think that 3 betting wouldn't work. And we should be defending. If we limp, I think H9 is going to be playing well enough. And this is much more reasonable semi-bluffing spot. Yeah, of course, as Neo said, that once he calls, we are always behind, but still. Jack 9. There are some turn cards which we can possibly double barrel. We might get some queen highs and such to fold, but it's quite coordinated board, so checking back would not be bad either. And in here we should definitely 3-bet something like, I think around 1200 against this sizing would be quite reasonable. And even that is fine. And no reason to see bet really here, just check. And I would probably be checking again. And definitely check call. And I would be check calling the reverse shove as well. And no reason to. Well, if we believe that he always calls pretty much, then we can shove here, but in general there's no reason to be shoving. Just call and give him rope to hang himself, so to say, and in here it's best play is going to be shoving, because if he does have some sort of straight draw, he's always calling, but might be check folding if he doesn't improve, if we just call. So yeah, I think heads up was pretty well played. Pretty well played. But I think earlier against that rake it would have been more reasonable in many spots to just open fold, grabbier stuff. So let's take one more. One more. Mygame might be the one to miss his coaching once again. But good luck for both of you. No, Mygame won now. Okay, so I think considering the previous time as well, it was like eighth possibility to get the coaching, so I suppose it was already time for the one time to happen. 50 hands. Ah, this was spin and go. Spin and go and 50 hands. What the heck? I would assume that those are more often like maybe 20 or 30 hands. But well, so we are playing to win in these spin and goes always, so there is no ICM considerations, and I should probably move these hearts a little bit. So the first question would be that why are we open raising 3.5 pp in this format? Because I would say that in general making anything bigger than min raise is going to be mistake more or less. Only reason to make this sizing would be that if we have really strong hand and we think that players are going to be making bigger mistake by this sizing. But I think we just end up into nasty awkward situation if we face a shove now, because in chip EV format, we still have pretty great hand overall. So just min raising pre-flopped here. 7-9 suited in, well, versus this sort of, if we have any sort of info on the guy that he looks like this, limping would probably be the optimal play, but as default I would be min raising. And min raising this one as well. Pocket sixes, in general I would be probably shoving against most of actions. Three, five, well this one we can just open fold. 9 jack, no reason to really raise here that much. We have playable hands for position, but we don't necessarily want to build the pot bigger here, so just check behind. And bluffing here, I would in general prefer smaller sizing like 25 or 30, and I think it's okay. In general, when people limp small blind and check flop, they are pretty often going to fold. But I think smaller sizing would do the job here. And I don't really see reason why we should be limping this hand, but as a hand itself, it's okay to be limping if we think that villains are 3-betting a lot against min raise. And again, I would bet like 40 here. I don't think there's reason to be potting it. And well, defending, we get great price, and we are playing for chip EV, and from this info we see that he's pretty active. Problem is that how often this hand is going to hit anything. But of course we have position as well, so I'm not saying this would be any sort of mistake, especially in chip EV format. I think in general we want to be just checking behind the turn, or if we do bet I would use like 60 sizing, but it's not that great hand overall. Like Jack X can give us some value and maybe some draw combos, but then if we value bet we want to size it a bit bigger. And always great to be on the better side of the setup. Queen 7 suited against min raise we would be happily defending. Against 3x I think it gets quite much closer on whatever folding or calling is better. Well, I think both options are okay. If it was offsuit I would be just folding definitely. And in here I would be checking behind. We have just middle pair with no kicker, and it's draw heavy board, so if we face check raise, it's just basically a situation where we have to be folding big amount of time, so just check behind and pot control. Nine, 10, we can min raise as long as villain is not really 3-bet happy. But if he is, then we should be just open limping. And yeah, I like checking here. and when the 10 comes, there's not much point in betting again. Of course, some plus draw combos or king or jack high, for example, might call, but I think it would be better to just check again and give him space to bluff if he wants. And a6 would be totally fine to just shove here. Basically, I don't like to raise small in general in these situations because quite often we'll be calling and we will build the pot with hand that doesn't play well post flop. But also against general limping ranges we make direct profit by just shoving here. So checking or shoving, in my opinion, are the best possibilities, and definitely leading turn like 40 or so. I think just potting it is not going to be the greatest option overall. Of course, this time we have strong enough hand for that. And pocket fours we have to be calling pretty much. And yeah, shoving 5 queen is totally fine. And he has been min raising a lot, so I would call here with this hand. It's pretty marginal though because of the stack depth. But I think calling is still a bit better than folding, but I wouldn't necessarily make it as stop and go play because like in here I don't really see that he would be folding like ace or king highs that much in general. And I might think that check shoving might make more sense than donk shoving. Those are pretty standard. Well, 5 king, I think shoving or limping would make most sense here. And again, I would use smaller sizing. And still, even though we don't have kicker, there's definitely value in betting again, but I think shoving here might be kind of too much, because if he has any sort of draw, well, at least reasonable player would be folding those, unless it's like really strong draw. So maybe like 120 or so would be the optimal way here. When he calls, I would assume that he has queen or king quite often. Yeah. And definitely calling the small raise when limping. But now we pretty much have to be folding. In general, I would be just giving up here. With some read you can stab. And it would be kind of reasonable here, because when he limps he often doesn't have that great high card hands, and his line would seem that he doesn't have much, so I think making like bet of 40 to 50 would make sense here. He might be folding that sort of hand on the river. And a7, if you min raise, you should definitely min raise call against this guy. Shoving is profitable as well, but I think a7 would still make more sense to be min raising more than open shoving. Same for ace9. And his c-bet's really small, but we don't have much on this board, so I think still check folding is totally okay. And if we do call the flop now, we should semi bluff here and bet something around half pot. And stacking off with 7 jack here. In general, I would also think that when villain uses bigger sizing, it's more of strength more often than weak hand in this spot, in my opinion. So, and I don't think we can assume fold equity. Well, not this time it seems. That it's not a strong hand. But still 7 jack is going to be, I would say, too wide. If we treat it as a shove, he needs to be wider than this. Of course, if we can make a read that his range is weak when he makes that sort of sizing, then it might make sense. But if not, he has to be opening over 70%. So I think in long run it would be better to just fold. And queen 9 we can shove. If we min raise or limp, I don't really like necessarily the folding option after that, so because of that I would often just shove here. Well, I think 6-7 suited here is closer because our stack is shorter. So I think this call is actually more reasonable. If we look from Nash ranges, it would be up to 6.3 big blinds, and we have like five big blinds overall. So I think the call is reasonable. But yeah, I think from this sample we could, for example, that one weak jack that we flopped mid pair, there was more merit in checking, in my opinion. That there's no sense to see bet every time you have that sort of weak hand. But anyway, there was, I think, 4 histories now, so that's enough for this coaching. So thanks for everyone sending hand histories and commenting on the chat. If you are going to play, good luck to your games, and if sleeping, good night.